Thank you for the introductions, and everyone, welcome to Denver. It's pretty fun to be here, especially flying from Finland, where we have equally cold temperatures. So I'm pretty excited to be here. Yeah, today we're going to talk about decentralized finance and basically how we could get decentralized finance, which is getting more and more popular in the Ethereum ecosystem, basically to the mainstream, and what kind of tools we need to use to achieve this goal. Now, to basically start with the small presentation, for some of you guys, Aave might not be that familiar as a name, but basically Aave is behind. Aave is behind. Oh. Yeah. All right, we're back on track. So basically, Aave is behind of a decentralized lending platform called ETHLend, which derives from Ethereum lending. And basically, we started to build decentralized finance in 2016. So basically, kind of early stage of decentralized finance and actually in dApps as well. So what ETHLend is all about, it's basically allowing our users to get loans against their cryptocurrency collaterals. So basically, our users are holding, for example, Ethereum, ERC20 tokens, for example, Omisigo, 0x, or today, for example, even Bitcoin. And these borrowers are actually taking loans to avoid actually selling assets. So there might be, for example, users that are participating in different kind of protocols, but actually do not want to sell these tokens, or they need more liquidity, and for example, to trade. We call this kind of lending model as over-collateralized lending. And today we have a lot of different kinds of types of over-collateralized debt positions. For example, there's MakerDAO with CDPs, our platform. Then there's also over-collateralized lending in margin, and there's, for example, even lenders who give cash loans against cryptocurrencies, such as, for example, Salt. We launched mainnet in 2017, and last year we were able to gain 20 million lending volume in our platform, which is pretty awesome because the whole platform that we have is based on smart contracts. So kind of it has its difficulties in the mainstream adoption. And today we're going to talk about how we at Aave are trying to tackle these challenges to get DeFi more mainstream. Now, here's a quick overview of the platform, just to give you more background details on what we are doing and what kind of users we are servicing. So what's interesting in our platform is that we have a direct-to-consumer approach, and basically it's a simple bulletin board which is based on smart contracts, and we connect lenders and borrowers together where they can make transactions, trustless transactions based on smart contracts. So for example, we have in the board user who pledges 0x tokens to basically borrow DAI. And that's one of the popular things to do now. For example, we have also a user there who is borrowing BTC, pledging BTC to borrow DAI as well. And today, one of the interesting parts why we're here is to talk about the DeFi itself. So DeFi is decentralized finance. And one of the important things to understand is how we can recognize decentralized finance, because there's different kinds of applications out there. So I think one of the most important things is that we are providing equal access to finance, which basically means having a trustless, open finance system where everyone can participate. So basically, it's censorship-resistant system where all the users are controlling their own funds, their own personal data, And basically, this means that if we have a borrower, for example, from India, we could have a lender from Finland, or we can have a borrower from US and lender from, for example, France. And our kind of goal is in decentralized finance to create something new and break barriers and basically provide more transparency. So basically, transparency aspect is very important because you are not trusting third party on information that it gives. Instead, everything is audible on the blockchain. And of course, one of the interesting parts is the counterparty risk mitigation that we're trying to achieve by using smart contracts. So, for example, if I take a loan from a platform which is based on smart contracts, whether it's ETHLend, MakerDAO, for example, or any kind of margin lending platform, I kind of trust that the smart contracts executes in a way that it's pre-programmed. And I think that's one very valuable point of decentralized finance, and including the reduction of costs. So basically, if we have programmatic transactions based on smart contracts, we could actually reduce cost compared to, for example, cost involved in labor or paperwork. But of course, today it's kind of like a challenging to argue with this aspect, mainly because the users are paying for each transactions in blockchain fees. But we'll get back to this point a bit later. A few examples of DeFi. We have Kyber Network for decentralized FOPs, MakerDAO's stablecoin, BXC for decentralized margin lending, and basically ETHLend as well, which is our peer-to-peer crypto-backed loan marketplace. The whole road to the decentralized finance has been kind of like pretty novel. So I think the whole idea of actually creating applications, financial applications that are trustless and based on open finance is a concept that has been around for a few years now. But the adoption-wise, basically, the DeFi is still in some aspects pretty challenging. So we could call the whole path to DeFi kind of like a silent path, because before 2016 and during that year, it's kind of like something where decentralized finance began. And what happened during that day, we basically had first interesting applications. We had, for example, decentralized exchanges, EtherDelta, WeTrust, which is basically social lending, EtherRisk, which is more of a insurance, smart contract-based insurance provider. And I still remember in 2016, there was a huge big post when EtherDelta came up that why people aren't using EtherDelta. And we have different kinds of conclusions on that, but I think it was 6 months after that post on Reddit, what we actually noticed that EtherDelta got more and more mainstream adoption. Not maybe mainstream, but more in crypto mainstream. And basically, so we could see that this is the kind of a starting path for decentralized finance. And during 2017, that was actually an interesting year because more and more projects were looking into traditional finance and thinking what kind of things we could actually take to the decentralized finance and trying to create an ecosystem. So during 2017, when we also released on mainnet, there was interesting projects as well. There was lending projects, derivatives projects. There was basically a stablecoin project, DAI, and kind of like a start for the ecosystem. And during last year, I think was one of the most kind of like fascinating years because we started to actually form an ecosystem for the decentralized finance. Now, basically, in a larger scale, there was interesting projects, for example, Augur, BZX, DYDX, and Kyber, Melonport. And if you think about it, these are small projects here and there, but in terms of mainstream adoption, they play actually a very, very important role, which we come back in a moment. So what we can conclude until this point, for the past years, the decentralized finance, and we could even say dApps in general, basically haven't gotten a significant adoption. So even though we have more people working in different projects, we have more developers here, we have more tools available, we have even specifically VCs that are interested in decentralized finance and basically into this field. So there's kind of like some kind of expectation of scalability. And of course, we have more PR and ways to integrate with DeFi. We have that process, for example, and different ways that the users could actually reach us more and our products. But still, we're not there yet in kind of like a mainstream adoption path. But I think in one way, we're getting there. We're getting really closely to that path. And the reason is basically because we are building a lot of things. We have different approaches. So in Edland, for example, we are trying to think, because we're consumer-oriented, how we can get people to use our products. And we have basically, from the past years, kind of trying to understand more like how do we reach more people and like what could be the solutions to get more mainstream adoption. And next we'll check some of these things and thoughts that basically we have come up with and look how these could be actually implemented in your DeFi projects or your ideas that you're building here or elsewhere. So one of the most interesting approach that we notice that basically DeFi, to get more mainstream, we actually need to approach the adoption as a ecosystem perspective. So for example, let's take a look on Edland. To have a valid system, valid decentralized lending market, that actually normal mainstream users could use, there's certain elements that has been missing previous years. For example, stable currency. If the borrower borrows, let's say, 1,000, well, let's say, for example, 100 Ether and returns 100 Ether after 6 months. So if that person will use those funds in the real life, for example, paying bills, expenses, holidays, and repays that loan, the Ether value might be different. So that's kind of like a challenging point in terms of lending. And of course, liquid aftermarket for assets. In Edland, basically, because it's collateral-backed loans, we also need to have a valid system that we can liquidate the collaterals in case of defaults or margin calls. And also interoperability with other chains. We know that most of the assets are held in other chains, for example, Bitcoin, Litecoin, and so forth. So there's kind of like a lot of users that we are not accessing at the moment, and that is a bit of a challenging for us. And of course, risk management, for example, in our case, how we get correct data through oracles and through our smart contracts in terms of assets that we are using in the platform. And of course, user accessibility, how the users can actually access the smart contracts and the application. So if you look at the whole, if you look at the whole ecosystem 2 years ago and look today, basically today we have a stable currency available. Today, for example, DAI liquid markets, you can use Kyber to convert currencies after default scenario or margin calls. We have made ourselves in Aave a interoperability solution for between Bitcoin and Ethereum smart contracts. We have WBTC. We have different oracles that we can use in more decentralized manner, such as the MakerDAO's USD Oracle. We have more accessibility. I mean, we have dApp browsers. There's so many dApp browsers today that actually users they can easier access the decentralized finance. Now, this is very interesting approach because, like here, what is happening is basically we are growing our adoption in a way that in an ecosystem manner when everyone else is building something. So you might be building here some sort of like a project that relates to decentralized finance. And even though it might have a niche use case, but if we can connect all these different DeFi applications, if we can integrate with for example, Kyber, we can integrate with DAI, for example, or we can integrate with other projects, we form an ecosystem where we are actually bringing together more users to the decentralized finance. So basically, we are sharing the user base, which is a very cool thing to do. And secondly, we are helping each other to get adoption. So I think what events like Denver and hackathons are about, for example, in terms of DeFi, is also to connect people, to build more ecosystem, and get more adoption. So I think this is one of the kind of like main things that we have found in our research, like how we can get projects out there. If you start using more Etlan, we start using more DAI, Kyber, work together more, and basically build more projects upon these protocols, then we can expand the user base and expand actually the benefits and share those benefits. And of course, second interesting thing is the educative approach. So when we started our first MVP mainnet release, pretty much there were so many things that the user need to know before you actually can use a dApp, or especially like a financial dApp, and there's so many things involved there. And kind of like, if we think about the actual user, like why would a user use decentralized finance? I mean, when we build things, we tend to find like very cool things to do. I mean, whether it's like margin lending or related to any kind of DeFi project, like, do we actually ask ourselves, like, does the user need to, is this something that a user could use? And why would the user use it? I mean, what are the benefits of using decentralized finance? And if there's easier ways to participate in centralized finance, would you actually care about decentralized finance? And there's a couple of examples. For example, in lending, we have Etlan, which is smart contract-based marketplace. And for example, we have Salt Lending, which is a lender who gives cash loans against cryptocurrencies. So there might be questions, what is the easiest way to get a loan? It might be a centralized provider, because it might be more regional, there is more support for you. But should we actually ask the user questions that, do you actually care about the things that are important? For example, open finance, that basically we have permissionless and a financial model where you are controlling the keys, transparent. And if these values are actually important to the user, he might choose the decentralized finance over the centralized. And I think it's all about educating the user the benefits. And I think in a one way, when we look at all the DeFi that is around there, we do pretty good work, but still I think we could do better in terms of actually educating the users, like, what are you getting for participating to DeFi? Another example could be DAI USDC. In DAI, you can basically see everything on the blockchain, what's happening there. In terms of USDC, for example, you're trusting a centralized party, and kind of like you need to think about and asking the user, like, is it okay? I mean, basically, are you sure you can redeem your currency back? So I think we could teach more the differences to the user, and by that way, kind of expand the whole user group of decentralized users. And one interesting thing, before actually we are designing the products that we are building for users, we could actually ask ourselves first that what are we actually fixing? Like, what DeFi could fix? So basically, there might be something around there that centralized finance cannot handle, cannot basically serve. And we could ask, could actually decentralized finance solve this issue? Is it related, for example, fraud, banking down banked, or basically granting loans without credit scoring? And there could be different kind of things that you can actually solve with DeFi. And one of the interesting projects is Bloom from San Francisco. So basically, one of the issues of data that relates to credit scoring is stored on centralized servers. And basically, there was a big hack on Equifax. I think it was 2017, if I remember correctly. So kind of like what Bloom tries to do is basically take out the data storage from the centralized providers and give the data of credit scoring to the user, the full control. So there are things you can actually fix with DeFi. I think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. So I'm so happy to see what everyone is building this weekend here, because there's so many things out there. And if you find a solution, I think DeFi basically becomes a solution to a problem. Now, this is pretty interesting one, because we all know about the UX problem, right? So basically, I mean, using decentralized applications is kind of like pain in the ass, I would say. Pardon my French, but we Finns tend to be a bit direct. So, and what I could say is that if you look at decentralized finance or centralized world, it's actually as painful as it is. I mean, to make a transaction, you need to have a bank account. To have a bank account, you need to go all the process to open it. And there's different kinds of processes out there. And basically, decentralized finance is kind of the same thing. So you have a lot of things you have to do before you can make the transaction, right? So what we could actually think about is basically not looking how things are done in the centralized world, because I think we could basically streamline a lot of things. And we need to basically streamline the learning curve for newcomers and think about like how we could get the accessibility for the users much easier. So that's one of the things. And I think we pretty much know this, but it's kind of like we know it. We know our UX sucks, but kind of like we need to work very hard on it. So I think when we basically hire teams, I think we need also to have very extensive UX developers and not solely blockchain developers. Is there anyone, by the way, working on UX? So there's a couple of guys. So if someone is hacking, I think you guys need to talk with these guys, because UX is very, very important, and I think it's a big thing this year. So I mean, the whole process of using your application, opening a MetaMask and connecting to the Web3 provider, getting gas and initiating the transactions, and like we need to think how we can streamline these procedures. And for example, what we did in Edland, we have used for 2 years, for example, MetaMask, because it's an easy way to store your keys inside the browser. But one of the feedbacks that we are getting, for example, for users, is that they need to install MetaMask, which is a third-party plugin, and kind of like it requires a bit more effort in the learning curve. So we provided an option for the user to actually generate a wallet and encrypt that wallet into their browser. And with that wallet, you can actually control your Ethereum-based address and keys, and basically Bitcoin keys as well. And this is pretty cool, because we have options to basically get the users quicker to the our application. And the more we have streamlined solutions, the cheaper our user acquisition cost is. Because if you have 100 people landing to your application and they want a loan, but only 10 understands what is a MetaMask or third-party plugin, and maybe 5 of them has that kind of like extension, it might be pretty difficult. But however, I think there needs to be options as well. I mean that you can use different kinds of wallets that you are accustomed to, whether it's Ledger, MetaMask, or any other. One interesting question that we have talked previously, and also yesterday in our meetup with MakerDAO, we basically discussed with some of the audience about whether we should actually go for mainstream. I mean, do we actually need to serve do we actually need to serve everyone and get blockchain technology everywhere? I mean, decentralized finance to all the financial applications that are out there. And it's kind of like depends, because we could think about whether actually a decentralization is a choice. So basically, if you think that decentralization is a choice, maybe it might be a good idea to actually focus on the segment of decentralized users who are privacy concerned, want to basically promote open finance, and basically want to hold their own funds. And of course, one thing to consider as well, whether or not this will work for you, is do you have enough users to actually support your protocol or your application? So it's kind of like a question that depends and requires a lot of thinking from your side. But it's pretty interesting to think before you start a DeFi project. So I would say, if you need to take something home from this this particular talk, I would say we need to understand our audience, like who we are building for. I mean, there's so many cool things that you can build. I mean, in Aave, we have a huge long pipeline of so amazing things, but we always need to ask, like, who are we building for and what's the future will be like. So let's say if you're building for users who care about decentralization, so you want to serve a demographic that already exists, think about like what's important for them, like what are the things that actually are important and how you can reinforce those things. On the other hand, if you are actually trying to get decentralized finance and kind of like compete on centralized providers, you need to also understand that basically you're not only competing on the security which decentralized finance provides and smart contracts, but you're also competing with the UX. So you need to be equally good and actually better than the centralized providers. And also, how do you support your users? Because in one way, we could say that decentralized finance and dApps, they are all about open access, permissionless. But what happens if something goes wrong? Where the user gets support? And those are very important things. We have had our application running 2 years now, and we feel that there's so much work involved into the customer support, and especially because there's so many things involved in the process of getting a decentralized loan. So that's something that you guys need to take into mind when you're building DeFi. So I think the main thing is to decide who you're building for. So happy building, guys. If you have any questions, I can basically answer them. Do we have a microphone here? Oh. Maybe we can get a microphone. Yeah.
Hi, I just want to know, how do you determine the how do you determine the credit worthiness of people that want to get a loan?
I think in our current phase, we're servicing users with basically over-collateralized loans. So in Edland, basically you might be a user who is holding 10,000 USD worth of Bitcoin, and basically you don't want to sell. Let's say you bought the Bitcoin at 20,000 and it's 3,600 per Bitcoin. But you might have a situation where you need some funds to basically operate, pay bills, or basically other expenses. So it's over collateralized. So you basically pledge 10,000 worth of Bitcoin, and you can borrow, for example, 5,000 worth of DAI or Ethereum.
Let's do a couple more questions while our next speaker comes up and gets set up. So is it alright if he gets plugged in here?
Yeah,
We'll take a couple more questions. Okay, awesome.
So presumably you use oracles to determine when the prices fluctuate of the. Up.
Yeah.
You guys presumably use oracles to determine when the price fluctuates. How do you incentivize those oracles to kind of report the right prices? Is that?
So was the question related to basically how we use the oracles to get the prices for the assets, right?
Correct.
Excuse me?
Basically, yeah. How do you incentivize those oracles?
Oh, that's a good question. So basically, currently we're hosting the oracles ourselves, but basically what we're trying to now do is create a network of oracles that basically are running a software which handles our oracles and handles also the interoperability between Bitcoin and our Ethereum smart contracts. And basically our idea is to incentivize these kind of like helpers with with our own native Lend token. But what we are actually looking beyond this is basically to participate or create an ecosystem where we have oracles, for example, with other decentralized finance projects out there that are already facing the similar issue, that they basically need some way to decentralize their oracle network, share costs, and so forth. Okay, thank you guys, and happy biddling.
All right. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. But before